Hi everyone, I am Nived. So in this video, we are going to do visitor ID QR creation process using queues in Robotic Enterprise Framework. So in our previous tutorial, that is tutorial 4.0, we have done the same use case using data table method, but here we are using we are actually doing this tutorial in RE framework using queues. So before starting this tutorial, I would like to thank Sharath Raju for hosting this challenge. So let's go into the description of this challenge, means what we have to do here. At first, you have to log to this website. Let me check. Yeah, just log to this website. Let me do it. Yeah. After going to this website, first you try to download the report here. From an Excel report will be there. Since I already had downloaded this report, I will show you that report that is downloaded from that site. Okay, so when you click on download report and download a file, you will get a file like this, and you can see different details like ID, name, action. Okay, so actually this may be the details of visitors, etc. And actually the main aim of our automation is to create QR code for each name. Okay, but we don't want to create QR code for all the name here. Only the name having the action QR code, we want to create the QR code. So that is the main aim of our automation. Okay, for example, in the case of Sharath Raju, we want to create the QR code because this action specifies a QR code. But in the case of David, the action specifies nothing, not available. So it indicates that no QR code has to be created for the name David. Similarly, for Alex and Jim also, there is no need for creating QR code. Okay, only the name having the action as create QR code, you have to create QR code for it. Okay, next we can see how we can create a QR code. For that, again go to the website and in the search panel search for that particular data. That is, for example, if you want to search for this data, you search by using name and also with ID. So search by like this. Let's say Sharath Raju. Then put a ID also here. Why we are specifying the name and ID here? So that to make our search more specific. Sometime for the for a when you type name, sometime two data may come. So then you have to filter the data based on ID. I can show you that case. Like for example, if you take the case of I think this ID number 70. If you just type the name itself. Uh, you can see that when you type the name you can get two columns of rows of data, and according to this then we after typing name, then we want to know which is actually our data we want to download. So then we have to look on the ID. So since according if you give look at the Excel, the ID given is actually 70, so we have to download the details of the ID 70. Okay, so so that is why to make our search more specific, we are using ID number. If you type 17 here, you only get that ID that data of ID 17 and name Harita. And after getting like this, then click on download button. Okay, actually you have to download this ID card here. Already you have to download the ID card here, and the ID card should be that it should be saved in the name file. For example, if the name is Harita here, you want to save the ID card in the name Harita in the PNG file format. Already I have downloaded for my previous work, actually where I have done the RE framework tutorial using data table method. I already have downloaded, like I have worked on it, and later I got the result, total result like this. Like you want to download the ID card like this. These are the ID cards actually which are downloaded by searching on it every time. So if you take ID card file name, it is actually the name of the person itself. For example, if you take let's say Sharat Raju's ID card, his name is actually Sharat Raju, and the ID card file name is also Sharat Raju, and it is stored in which format? It is stored in PNG file format. Okay, so that is what we have done here. Okay, after downloading that ID card, what we want to do? Because our main aim after downloading this ID card is we want to create a QR code for that particular name and ID. So after downloading that ID card, you want to extract this ID number. You take this case of this ID card. The ID number is actually 1000001. Using this ID number, you want to create a QR code. For creating the QR code, already in the challenge itself, an application is provided. So you can access that from the description link itself. I will put it in the YouTube channel description. So just this is the QR code app, and here what you need to type is the ID number to create the QR code. Here we know that our ID number is 1000001. Type that ID number here. Okay, 1000001. Then after that, click on create QR code. Now you can see that a dialog box will appear. Now in this section you want to type the file path where you want to store your QR code, and okay, and the QR code should be saved in JPG file format. After saving that QR code, like you want to click on save button. Okay, so I will show you in what format you want to store the QR code, what should be the file name and how it should be stored after this. So just for an instant I just saving here, let's say give a name 4. Sorry, I just give it a name 4 and just save it here. Okay, so after saving, you can see that you can get a pop-up like this. Now you have to click on this pop-up, and same thing you have to repeat for all other data whose actually action is QR code. This is what you have to do entirely in this challenge. And how this next, how this QR code file should be saved, I will show you from my work itself, which I have done earlier. We can see here, if you check on Q, this is actually this folder where actually I have stored my QR code. Actually, this is, I told you that this is my work on RE framework tutorial using data table method. At that time, I have run my workflow and I have got result like this. And you can see that in this folder, I am storing the QR code. And within, if you if you select this, like just say, if you select this QR code folder, you can see there are many folders. If you go to each folder, you can see a QR code corresponding to each ID number, and the file name, it should be, let's say we are creating a let's say we are creating a QR code for this name D1AD, and we are, so first what we have to do here, first we want to extract the, well, first we want to open the image file of the ID card, and then we want to extract the ID number of this UNID, and then we want to type it into the QR code application, and after that you want to save in a specified file format. So it is actually, its file name should be what, name underscore ID, and it should be saved in JPG file format, and it is stored under another folder whose name is itself the name of the person for which we are creating the ID card. You can see another example. For example, in the case of Sharat Raju, you click here, actually we are creating a QR code for him, and the QR code name, file name should be name underscore ID dot jpg file, and it is stored in another folder having the name as the name of the person itself. Okay, so in this way we want to save this QR code. Okay, I hope you have understood what we have to do in this automation work. Okay, so just close this. So since we are doing since we are doing this process using queues, so we want to create two workflows. One is known as dispatcher, which actually takes the data, that is, if you take this Excel file, so since we are working with queues, we want to create two workflows. One is dispatcher, other is performer. The function of dispatcher is to take the data from the Excel file and transfer to a queue. Okay, that is created in the orchestrator. Next is performer. The function of performer is to retrieve the value from the queue and then processing it. Here our processing means to create QR code for each name whose action is specified as create QR code. Okay, so that is what we have to do in this tutorial. Okay, and please remember that here while creating the dispatcher workflow, we are not actually transferring all the data, only the name having the action QR code we are transferring to the queue item. Okay, so that it makes us too easy to process. Okay, so that is what we are doing here. Okay, so let's go to creating the workflow. So we can start with creating dispatcher workflow. So dispatcher workflow is the workflow which actually transfer the required data from this Excel file. Required data means the data having action as create QR code into from the Excel file to the queue. Okay, orchestrator queue. So that is why we are creating a dispatcher workflow. And next time we will create a performer workflow which will retrieve the data from the queue and process it as per our required needs. So that is what we are going to do throughout this tutorial. So first we are going to create the dispatcher workflow. For that, open the UiPath Studio, just maximize it and click on uh, like Robotic Enterprise Framework. Create a name, for example QR code. It is a dispatcher. So dispatcher and tutorial. Now here you can save this. So click on create. So it will create the workflow. Let's wait for some time. Yeah, it create the workflow. Stop on the main workflow. So before starting to do something with this RE framework, so first we want to create a queue in the orchestrator. For that, just click on website platform.uipath.com and click on service. Now click on queues. So just create another queue here. So you can give it a queue, name it as let's say QR code. Okay, give it a description. Stores the data for stores the data by which QR code is created. Okay, you can specify the retry and you can specify the maximum number of retries as 2. Click on add. Now you can see that the QR code queue has been created successfully. Now after that, just go to this dispatcher workflow. So while starting with this RE framework tutorial, the first step is what we want to identify the variable type of the transaction item. Since we can, our main aim of dispatcher workflow is to take the required data from this Excel file and transfer to the queue item. So our transaction item should be what? A data row, since we are transferring the data from the Excel file to the queue in the case of a dispatcher workflow. So for that, what you have to do, first change the variable scope of this transaction item to data row, because in default it is set as queue item. So change here by type as data row. Now click on system.data.data row, click OK. When you press enter, now we can see that the validation error is thrown at get transaction data state and process transaction. For that, just click on open workflow. Now change the argument to, let's say, queue item to, let's say, data row. Okay, since we know that this get transaction item is not required. The reason is that get transaction item activity is used to retrieve data from queue. Here it is a case of a dispatcher which actually transfers the data from Excel file to queue. So it is not required. So what you can do, you can disable the activity either by right clicking and selecting disable activity or using Ctrl plus T. So I just disable this activity, then click on save. After that, still there's a validation error here. Actually, go to import argument and yeah, and give the name as transaction item. Click OK. Okay. Now the validation error is now okay there. So then again type same name transaction item equal to what? Nothing. Okay. So after that same log error is there. So give it a name like transaction item and transaction item nothing. Okay. So I think we have removed all the validation error in the get transaction data state. So now we can move to process transaction. So process transaction, same thing we had to repeat. Just go to open the process workflow, then change the argument to data row. Click OK there, and then click on save. After that, again there is a validation error is there. So click on final, and then click open the workflow, and then change the argument to data row. Okay. After that, click on save. When you change the date variable type of transaction item, you can see the validation error here. Correct it. Since we know that this part is required whenever transaction item is whenever transaction item is a queue item, it is not required. So we can just disable this activity. Click on close, and then after that we save it, and then go to business exception. Do the same thing as done before. Disable the activity and click on save. Then again go back and click on system exception. Here just disable this since it is required whenever transaction item is a queue item. Okay, comment it out. And now after that also we does not require this because it is used whenever transaction item is a queue item. So disable also this part. Okay, after that click on save, and yeah, we can see that there is still validation error there. Why? Since I think we have changed the sorry, I think yeah, still there's a validation error here. The reason is, yeah, again click on OK. I think the validation error is being thrown out. So still there's a validation error in the process section. What is that? Let us check. I think just open the workflow. I think yeah, it's corrected. Data row is being corrected. So click save. I think there is some changes to be made in import argument. Yeah, you have to type that transaction item here. Okay, so click on save. So after clicking on save, now you can see that all the validation error in the get transaction data and process transaction has been removed. Okay, so let's start with doing with the process. At first, you can start with initialization state. Okay, but we know that actually what we are doing here, we are actually taking the data, like we are reading that Excel file, taking only the required data to the queue item. So since there is no need of opening any applications regarding this, you can avoid that initialization state here. There is no need of initialization state here. Also, like similarly, in the process stage, you don't have to add any other activities. The reason is that there is like since there is no applications open, so there is no application is there which is required to be closed. So you can avoid the close all application workflow also. There is no nothing to be added in the close all application workflow. Okay, So since there is nothing to be done in the initialization state, we can directly go to the get transaction data state. So in get transaction data state, what we are doing actually, we are actually retrieving the transaction item. In our case, the transaction item actually is a data row whose action corresponds to create QR code. Okay, and then after retrieving the transaction data in the process transaction, we are transferring the data to queue. So that is what we are doing here. So for that, click on get transaction data, and then click on open the workflow. Okay, so before doing here, try to save this Excel file in this workflow folder itself so that it can be easy to access. So for that, click on cut it and paste it here. Let's say just paste it here. Okay, so close this. Then since you have, just refresh it. Now you can see that your Excel file is in the workflow folder so that it can be easy to access. Now, in the config Excel file, try to add this Excel file name also. For that, click on config file. Now, you have to specify what here you have to specify the Excel file. So just specify Excel file. Just specify the value. Value means the path of or the name of the Excel file, since it is in the same workflow itself. Like this Excel file is within the same workflow of our RE framework, so there is no need to add a complete path. For that, what we have to do here is just go the RE framework. I think it is being stored here. Now, if you just yeah, you can see. Sorry, I think. Okay, now just copy this because I don't comfortable with typing that long name itself. Okay, so just type it in the config file corresponding to this Excel file. Okay, now also give the orchestrator queue name. So just check here what is orchestrator queue name. Orchestrator queue name is what? QR code. So just save it here. Okay, so click on save. After that, go to constant. Now you have to specify the maximum retry number here. The reason why you are specifying the maximum retry number greater than 0 in this case is because our transaction item is actually a data row. It is not a queue item. So you have to specify the maximum retry number. You can set it greater than 0. Mostly I take it as 2. Okay. So then click on save. When you work with performer, you don't have to set this, because in performer actually the transaction item is the queue itself, but here it is a dispatcher, so you have to set it greater than 2. So then after that, click on OK, save, then close it. After that, you have saved that config file, like you have saved that Excel file path in the config file. After that, like we are actually in the get transaction data workflow. So here what we want to do, we want to assign the transaction item. So for assign the transaction item, what we need to do, we want to first read the Excel file completely and filter only those data whose action is create QR code. Then after that, based on some condition, we are actually assigning the transaction item. So for that, what we want to do, we have to create a two sequences. First sequence, first read the Excel file and filter it based on our requirement. So first sequence is what? Reading the Excel file and filtering. Okay, so first what we want to do, we want to put a condition, if condition. So what should be the if condition? That is, actually we only want to read the data once, like we only want to read this Excel file once, not in every transaction. We don't want to read this. For that, you can specify like this: in transaction number dot to string dot equals 1. This indicates that when transaction number is 1, which indicates that when it is the first transaction, then you can read the workflow, or you can read that Excel file and store it in the data table and filter it. Okay. But if it is like the second transaction, there is no need for reading the data again and again, since already it is stored in the data table itself. So for that, for reading that Excel file, you can use read range activity. So in the workbook, you can find a read range activity. Now you have to specify the workflow path. Since we know that if you just open that config file, if you just open the config file, yeah, yeah. So if you open the config file, you have like stored that Excel file in this config file itself. So you can retrieve it through the dictionary, in config dictionary. So you can just specify in config, in config, in config what Excel file. So in config, let's say Excel file. The output of this is an object. The output of this dictionary is actually is an object. You want to convert it to string. You just check it whether it is correct or not. Just I feel it copying it better. Otherwise, some error may happen. So just copy it. Then after that, type it again here. So you can see in config Excel file dot to string. Okay, here we are actually saving the Excel file path. Now you want to specify sheet name. The sheet name is what? The sheet 1 itself. Okay, now you want to specify the read range. Okay, just specify the read range. Okay, now we can give it a name for this. You can say read Excel file. So after reading this Excel file, what we want to do? We want to store this data out, the whatever we have read into a data table. So you can store here the data table name by using data table name. Already in RE framework, they have given input, output, transaction data as a data table. So click on this. Okay. So after clicking on this, so here what we have done, that is when the transaction number is 1 or when it is a first transaction, we are reading that Excel file and then we are storing it in the data table. But we know that since in read range actually read all the data, but we only want some data whose action is create QR code. So for that, what you can do, you can use a filter activity so that you can filter the unwanted part. For that, you can use filter table data table. You can say give it name. You can say filter action. Based on action, you want to filter. So just open this. Give the input data table. The input data table transaction data, and output data table will be the same. Okay. Now, what is your condition? You have to specify here. So for that, either you can keep the rows. If you want to keep the row, sorry, keep the column. First give the column name. What is the column name you want to keep? On based on what condition? So click on action. Sorry. Yeah. Click on action. Sorry. Copy this action. So you want this column name action to have only the values what create QR code. Okay. So that you can filter only the data rows whose action is create QR code. Okay. So click on create QR code again and just specify it here. Okay. So now after doing this, we are actually filtering the data here. So then click on create QR code. Sorry, click on OK. After that, the filtering condition also we have specified here. So this step is actually over. That is, in this sequence, what we have done, we have put a condition. If the transaction number is 1, then we are reading the whole Excel file and then we are filtering the data. That is what we have done in this sequence. So in next sequence, what we have to do? In the next sequence, we want to assign the transaction item. So you can give like this, assign transaction item. So for assigning the transaction item, what should be the condition? So there should be a condition in which the transaction item should be assigned. So the condition should be what? If you just look into this Excel file, you're only retrieving the data, like after the filtering, you only get the data whose actions create QR code. If you look for how many data are there with create QR code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 data. Okay. So only 10 data rows will be there. Okay. So our transaction is being processing. If our transaction number or the transaction number is greater than the row count of this data table, filtered data table, so we can see that there should be a blank data there, and you can provide the transaction item as nothing. If you provide transaction item as nothing, it indicates that there is no data and it finally ends the process. So that is what going to happen. So we want to process, give the condition based on like that itself. So what should be the condition? In transaction number should be less than or equal to input output transaction data dot rows dot count. Okay. So that is what the condition. If this condition exists, means if transaction number is less than the row count of this transaction data, what you can do? You can assign the transaction item. You can give assign the transaction item. So you have to provide the value here. So just out transaction item, you can provide the variable value. The value should be input output transaction data dot rows. You can give in transaction number. Okay, just in transaction number -1. So this actually correspond to each data row or each data row of filtered data table input output transaction data dot rows bracket in transaction number -1. Okay, after doing this, then what you have to specify in else condition means when the number of transactions exceeded the row count of the transaction data, you have to assign the output transaction item out transaction item as what? Nothing. Just specify it as nothing. Okay. So this is what we are actually doing in what? Assign transaction item. So click on save. So I just summarize what we have done in this section. At first, we are creating two sequences. One is for reading the Excel file and then filtering it. And then after that filtering, you are assigning the transaction item based on condition. So that is what we have done in this get transaction data workflow. After the get transaction data workflow, what we have to do? We have to process the transaction. In our case, processing the transaction means take each transaction item and transfers to the queue. So that is what we have to do here. For that, just open the process workflow since it is a dispatcher, and just use queue, that is add queue item. I have to use add queue item for adding data from this transaction item or data row to the queue. So you have to specify the queue name. A queue name already we have specified in the inconfig file as, then just specify like the queue name in config orchestrator queue name dot to string and click on add queue name. So now like we have add the queue. So here this activity actually takes each transaction item and transfers to the queue. Now you want to specify the collections. Okay, so what data you want to transmit here, etc. So in our case, we want to transmit the data. What are the data of from the filter data? You want to transmit ID, name, and action. Okay, so you can create one collection variable like that. First is ID, and it should be transferred from in transaction item. Since in transaction item is a data row, so what should be the column index of this id? It should be 0. So for that you can see 0 dot to string. Similarly for name, okay, so name also you can like you are specifying the collection name, collection variable name as name. So to store the name values, in transaction item dot to string, because first column index of name is 1. Next you want to store is action. So for that you can store action provide the collection name as action and give the name as in transaction item. The column index of the action is 2. Column index of item is 2 dot to string. Okay, so actually in the collection we have specified what data you want to transfer into the queue item. Okay, so this is actually our process, and just click on save. After completing this process, so in process itself what we are doing, it's a simple process, like we are taking the transaction item, that is actually each data row, and this each data row is we are actually transferring to queue by using add queue item. Okay, so that is what we have done here. So after the process transaction, so next step is end process. In the end process, more commonly there is close all applications. Since we didn't have opened any applications in the initialization state, because it actually deals with Excel files, etc. So there is no requirement for any application to be opened. So similarly, in the same way, there is no need for application to be closed in the close all application workflow. So we can avoid that. But in the to take a project, next you want to add, like you want to kill the process, like in our case which is the process to be killed here? It should be excel, because excel process is being done here. So for that what you want to do here is you can use kill process activity. So just specify the kill process here. You can give kill process excel. Now you want to give the process name. What is the process name? Process name should be excel. Okay, so why you are using kill process? The kill process actually helps to like close any application if it is found to be open before starting the automation, and also helps to forcefully close the application if found any system exception. So that is one advanced use of kill process activity. Okay, so we are actually updating the, like we are adding this kill process in the kill all process section. So after this, I think we have completed our dispatcher workflow. So just we can summarize what we have done in the dispatcher workflow. So in dispatcher workflow, what we have done here is, like there is no need of applications to be opened because it deals work with Excel. So we directly go to get transaction data. So in get transaction data, what we have done, get transaction data, at first we have read the Excel file, then filter it based on the action condition, like action should be only create QR code. After that what we have done, we have assigned the transaction item based on certain condition. Okay, so that is we have done in the get transaction data state. After that we have went to process transaction. In process transaction what we have do, since in our dispatcher workflow, main aim of this dispatcher workflow automation is to take the data from the transaction item and transfers it to a queue item using add queue item activity. And we also specify the what are the data we want to transmit: id, name and action. So these are the data which is to be transmitted. Okay, so that is what we have done all together here. After this what we have done, we have kill the process that is being used here. Since we are using Excel process, so you are killing that Excel process only. Okay, so this is what already we what together we have done in this QR code dispatcher workflow. Okay, so I think before starting this, just check whether our robot is in connected with the UiPath orchestrator. So for that, just click on Orchestrator Settings. Okay, so Orchestrator Settings just opening. So now you can just open the Orchestrator. I think just open it again. Yeah, it's opening. Yeah, you can see that, yeah, it is connected. So you can see, you can ensure that our workflow, our studio is connected to UiPath Orchestrator. So we can run our workflow. So just like just save this data. Also save this data too. So now just yeah. So now what you want to do? You can just run this process. For that, just use run process section. Click on run. Now you can see that uh, yeah, it start to work. Okay, so just refresh it. Refresh. Yeah, I think our workflow has been done successfully. Our workflow has completed every data successfully. You can see that yeah, translation 1, translation 2, translation, yeah, up to translation 10 data. Actually we know that in Excel file there are 10 data, so all the 10 data has been uh, processed or transferred to queue successfully. You can just view here. Just click on your code again. Just view the transaction. Yeah, you can see that around 10 data has been transmitted here, and its status is actually is new since it is not being processed. When it being processed, the status will change according to the required conditions, whether it is successful or failed, anything. Okay, so when it start to process, it should be in progress condition. Okay, so this is what we have done actually in our perform dispatcher section. That is, we take the data from that Excel file, filter it, and transfers the data to the queue. Okay, so this is what we have done in the QR code, like dispatcher workflow. So after creating the dispatcher workflow, so next step is we want to create the performer workflow. So in performer workflow, what we have to do, we want to take the data from the queue. That is, from this queue item we want to take the data, and then we want to, let's say here, we want to search for that ID card and then download that ID card for that particular name and ID, and then extract that. Let's say show you one example here. Already I have done this challenge, so I can show that example. Yeah, so here from this website you want to search for the name and ID, and then for that name and ID you want to download the ID card, and the ID card appear like this. And from this ID card image file you want to extract this ID number, and using this ID number you type these details in this QR code application as given in this challenge. I think yeah, this is the application they have provided. This challenge, in the challenge link you can find the link for downloading this application. And and after extracting this ID number you want to type into this QR code application, then create QR code for that. This is all what we have to do in the perform workflow. So let's start it by doing it. So just click on like another create another workflow, that is performer workflow. So give it a name, QR code performer. Okay, and save it in a given destination folder itself. So yeah, save it here. Okay, save it here. Click on create. Yeah, it has created that RE framework workflow. Now, so first step before doing this tutorial or before doing the work on RE framework is First, we want to identify what is the variable type of our transaction item. So we know that in the perform workflow, we are taking the data from the queue and then we are processing it. So our transaction item should be queue item. And defaultly for RE framework, transaction item is a queue item. So we don't have to change the variable here. Thus we can skip the step that is required when the variable changes occur. Okay. So that step we can completely avoid it here. Okay. So next step is like we can directly go for creation of the workflow. First we can go to initialization state. So in initialization state, what is happening, we are actually opening all the application and the browser etc which is required for our automation. And in our case we know that we require to open this website and also this QR code application, that is also we need to open that website and the QR code application provided here. Okay, so for our automation, for that we have to specify what applications and the website we have to open in the initialization state. Just open initialization state and click on open workflow. And then here we want to we want to specify the applications and browser which we want to open. And for that we can like specify the browser URL in the config file, also the application path in the in the config file itself. Okay, so for that just open that config file. So okay, open the config file. So in addition to adding the details of the application and the website, you want to make some changes here. First is try to provide the queue name, because we are working with queue, so we should provide the queue name here. So here our queue name is what? QR code. So provide the name QR code here. QR code. Okay, and then provide the details of the website as well as the application file path. So website uh, website, what is the website link? Just provide the website link here. And okay, also provide the application file path, that is QR code application file path. For that try to copy this file or this QR code application. Just close this. Try to save this QR code application in the workflow folder itself, so that you can easily access it. So for that just open the where you have saved that file. Yeah, here. So try to paste that QR code application here. Okay, so that you can have an easy access. Okay, so for that again open this. Now specify the application file path. Since the application is within this workflow folder itself, so you don't have to specify the complete file path here. So what you can do here is you can specify the file path up to this. Okay. Okay. You can specify the file path up to this section. Okay. So okay. So now you can provide a description for corresponding to each row. For website, you can provide a description like this. This is the website from which ID card is downloaded. For application, can provide description. This is the app from which QR code is generated for each ID number. Okay. After that, click on save and then go to constant section. in constant section, we know that we want to specify the maximum retry number, okay, which the system will retry in the case of system exception. So we know that since we are working with queues, and while we have created the queue, we have specified the maximum number of retries there. So we don't need to specify the maximum retry number here. You can give it as 0 itself, since our transaction item is a queue item and we are working with queue here. So just click on save and then minimize it. So we have added the website path, also the application path. So now in the init all application, we can create two sequence, one to open the browser and next to open the QR code application. So first drag a sequence here and give it a name, that is open website. Okay, so open the for opening that website, you want to use open browser activity. Okay, use open browser activity and give it a name, open browser identity management. Okay, and you are asked to insert the URL here. Since we have saved the URL in the config file itself, config excel file itself, so you can directly access it using in config dictionary. So just specify the in config, what is the name of that we provided website. The key value is website. Okay, so key value is what? Website. Key value is website, and since the the key is a website, and the value of this in config dictionary is object, so you want to convert to string, so use dot to string out. Okay, so now specify from using which browser you are using. So we are using Chrome, so specify Chrome here. So here by this we are opening this identity management website. So after opening this identity management website, try to use inside this do section, try to use maximize window option so that you can maximize this browser while working. Okay, use maximize window activity for maximizing the window. Then click on save. So after opening the website, create another sequence which actually opens this QR code application. Okay, so for that, give it a name, opening QR code application. Okay, so for opening the application, you can use open application activity. So give it a name, let's say open application, open QR code encoder application. Okay, so now indicate the window on the screen. Yeah. Now, since the file, this is actually the complete file name where you are actually where this application is being stored. So in like since you have stored the details of the application file path in the config excel file, so you can access it using in config dictionary. So in config, give it a name, let's say app. The value of this dictionary is a string, so give dot to string. Okay, yeah, it's correct. So click on OK. Let me check whether the file path is in, everything is okay or not. Let me check here. So after opening the application, so next step we can just maximize the window, okay, of this application. So use maximize window option. Sorry. Okay. So so our initial application workflow section has been completed. So what we have done here, actually we have opened two, like one website and an application. So that is what we have done in the initial application workflow. So just close this section. So after completing the initialization state, so next we can move on to get transaction data state. Just open get transaction data, open get transaction data workflow. So in get transaction data, we are actually retrieving each transaction item. Okay, so from this queue, we are actually retrieving each queue item. If you just go here and view transaction, you can see that yeah, actually this is actually our each queue item, and each queue item is retrieved in this section, and it is retrieved by using get transaction item. Okay, so in get transaction item, if you look at the property section, we want to specify the queue name. Okay, since queue name we already had specified in the config dictionary, orchestrator queue name value is QR code. That's QR code is the name of the queue. So also if you check here, already we have specified here like this, so there is no need to add anything here. And the transaction item, output transaction item, is actually stored in our out transaction item variable. So nothing changes has to be made here. So in the get transaction section, what we are doing, we are actually retrieving each transaction item from the queue. So that is what we are doing in the get transaction data workflow. Okay, so no changes has to be made here. So after this, close this. So after the get transaction data, so next step is we want to move to process transaction. So actually what we are doing in the process transaction is that after retrieving each transaction item, so each transaction item contains what? The details, because each transaction item contains like ID, name and action, because only the action which has to be, which is create QR code, is only found in this queue item, so that it is very easier to process. So our main required details are ID and name. Okay, so the each transaction item contains these details: ID, name and action. Using these things we want to generate our QR code. Okay, for that so in the process section, actually we want to create three sequences. First is to download the ID card from this identity management website. Okay, after downloading the ID card, next we want to open that ID card and then extract that ID number. And after this process, after extracting the ID number, we want to type that ID number in this QR code application, and then we want to click on create QR code. Okay, so three sequence will be: first is we want to download the ID card. For that there is a particular sequence. Second sequence, what it do, it extract that ID number from this image file of ID card. And the third sequence, you will type that ID number into the QR code app and generate the QR code and save it in a specified file format in a specific folder. So that is what we have to do here. For that, first we want to create first sequence. What is the first sequence? So just drag and drop first sequence, give it a name. What is the first sequence to do? It download ID card from website. And also please note that the ID card is downloaded in which format? PNG file format, and should be saved in what, like what should be the file name? It should be the name of the person for which the ID card is downloaded. Okay, so for storing our ID card, actually we can create a folder in our workflow itself, and also for storing the QR code also we can create one folder. For that create folder. For storing ID card, you can create ID folder, and for storing the QR code, you can create another folder, QR code. Okay. So in the ID card, in the ID folder, we are storing the ID card details. So for that, so here what we want to specify. So at first, what we want to do, here in the downloading ID card, first we want to search in this search panel with what, with name and ID. Okay, and then click on download button. Then we want to save that ID card in this ID card ID folder. So first just use attach browser activity, attach browser activity. Okay, and just give attach browser, let's say identity management. Okay, so then indicate that window on the screen which website you want to attach. Okay, yeah. After inside this website, what we want to do, we can, like, our main aim is to download the ID card here now. So first we want to search with name and ID. So use type into activity here. Type into activity to type the to type what ID to type name and ID to search for ID card. Okay, so for typing that name and ID, just specify like this field where you want to type the ID, and after that tick on empty field. Okay, so the correct name, let's say, okay, name and ID. Now, what you want to specify here, name and ID to search for, to make our search more specific. If you just type the name itself, sometime for the same name there existed two options, two ID card options. So to make our search more specific, we are using name space ID for our search. Okay, so for that you want to retrieve the value of what ID and name. So first you should type name. So in transaction item, to retrieve value from the transaction item, in the case when transaction item is a queue item, use in transaction item dot specific content. It is a dictionary, and its key is actually what, its key is to check we just check a single transaction. You can see you want to retrieve what, name. So just specify the key name. Key is actually what, name itself, and name, and the output of this dictionary is actually a object. So for that just specify what, dot to string. So after that plus, just give it some space, plus you have typed the name here. Next you want to type ID here. So dot specific content. So what is the key name of for extracting the ID? It is ID itself. So specify it here. Okay, output is a dictionary. So we can so output is a object. Output of this dictionary is an object, you want to convert to string, so use dot to string. So click on OK. Okay, so after typing that ID card, okay, for example, if you just type the ID, like if you type the detail, for example, if you type, let's say Sharath, let's say Sharath Raju 1, you can see that you can get the option for downloading the ID card corresponding to this name and ID. Okay, so for in some cases, for example, even you type the details, like for example, if in this queue item, like in this queue item, for example, instead of the name as James, the name was incorrectly provided as James 1. Okay, so let's check for that. So if the name was provided as James 1, what is its ID? 23. To specify James 123, you can find that there is no matching record is found. That is, if there is some error that is provided in the name, you may not find the record. So at that time, it is a business exception. So based on this, you want to specify the condition. So just check this like this. So for that, you want to use this you want to use this download option or download UI element as the element exists activity. If it exists, you download that ID card and save it in a specified file format. If it does not exist, you want to throw a business exception so that our process can go to next time session and then do it again. Okay, so for that you specify an element exists activity here. Okay, specify element exist activity. So element exist activity specify the element. Yeah. So give it a name. Let's say element exist download button. Now you want to it actually gives a boolean variable output. So to store the boolean variable, create a variable. Let's say ID card exist. So ID card exists is actually a boolean variable that actually tells whether this download button option is available or not. Okay, change the scope to, let's say, process. Okay, after this, now you have to provide a if condition. What should be the if condition? The if condition, just provide the if condition here for downloading the ID card if this download button is available. Okay, so provide, give it a name. Let's say if ID card exists. If the ID card exists means, give it a name. So ID card exists. What does it indicate? Actually, if this element exists, it is actually a boolean variable. If it exists, it is stored in a boolean variable called ID card exists. If ID card exists implies if this download button exists, then what we have to do? Like if this download button is available, what you want to do? You want to click on download button. Then you inside this a file a save as dialog box will appear where you want to specify the file path and then click on save, and that is what we want to do here. So for that, what you can do here is use click activity. So what does it do? Click download button. Okay, so Alex specify that element which is to be click. Okay, so after, like, if this ID card exists, we click on download button. So if you click on this download button, what happens? A pop-up will appear. So we want to type the details here. So for that, use type into activity. Okay, so you can say, give it a name. Let's say type file path for ID card. So for that, like, here what you're doing here is that, like, when you click on download, a pop-up save as pop-up window will appear. Now here you want to specify the complete file path where you are saving your ID card file. Okay, so we know that since we are actually saving our all ID card data, if you just see, yeah, Actually, we are actually saving our ID card data in this ID card folder and the QR code data in QR code folder. So, and please remember that the ID card file is saved in what? PNG file format. Okay, so just specify the element. Yeah, click on empty field. Now here you want to specify the file path. So to you can use environment dot current directory. What is the use of environment dot current directory? It actually gives the file path of a workflow, that is QR perform workflow. So after that, where you want to save your file, like after reaching the workflow you want to save, like environment dot current directory will gives the like the workflow, the folder path of our QR code perform workflow. So then after that we want to save this our ID card in which file? Folder ID card ID, as specified here. In this ID folder we are saving our ID card file. So ID plus what is should be the name of our ID card. ID card name should be the name of the person for which uh, the ID card is being downloaded. For example, if you take the case of, let's say, like here we are actually downloading the ID card of Sharath Raju. So the name of the file should be Sharath Raju itself. So for that, use in transaction item. You can retrieve the data directly from the transaction item in transaction item dot specific content. Since we are working with you, in transaction dot specific content is used. Sorry. And then you want to specify what is the key name. So it is name itself. So just specify name dot to string, plus you want to specify the format to here. So what is the format in which our image file is saved? PNG file format. So what you want to do here? Environment dot current directory will gives the workflow path or workflow folder path. In our case, the path of this QR code performer, and then this ID card is saved in this ID folder in the format name, in the format of, or in the file name as name of the person for which ID card is being downloaded in the PNG file format. Okay, so that is what we are doing here. Okay, after typing that file name, etc., so next step is what? We want to click on the save button to save our workflow. So use click click option, sorry, just specify, yeah. When you click when you click on download, a pop-up will appears and you want to click on save option. So for that, click save, click save, and then click on, okay. So what we have done here, so if the ID card exists by using this element exist activity, we are storing that boolean condition in the ID card exists. It indicates that whether this download option is available or not. If this ID card exists is true, this download option is available. If it is false, this UI element is not available. But if this ID card exists, means if this download button is available, then we want to click on download option, then type the complete file path, then you want to click on save for saving that file. Okay, so after this, so we have specified everything that is required in which condition? In then condition, sorry, in then condition, if our ID card exists. But if the ID card doesn't exist, I told you that if the ID card doesn't exist, what we want to throw? A business rule exception. So for that you can use throw activity, throw activity, throw activity. So specify throw So you can also give it a name. Let's say throw exception. So what is an exception here? Business rule exception, because business rule exception is an exception when, for example, when the data is missing, etc. Business rule exception is used. New business rule exception. Can you give a message incorrect details? Click on OK. So so what we have done here is uh, like in this section, or in this download ID card from website sequence, we are first downloading, like we are searching for the name and ID in the search panel, and then if this download button option is available, we are clicking on download button, and then so typing the file path along with the file name in the png file format, then we are clicking on save. Okay, clicking on save option to save their id card. But if this id card doesn't exist, means if this download button is not available, what we want to throw a business rule exception, indicating that the data in our queue item is actually wrong, is provided as wrong by the user. Okay, so that is what we are doing altogether in this download id card from website sequence. So after downloading the id card, the next step is what we want to extract the id number. So for that, what we can use, we can create another sequence. So just you can use sequence. Okay, so in this sequence, what we are doing, we are actually extracting id number from id card. So since we have downloaded that ID card and saved in a specified folder, for extracting that ID number from our ID card, we want to open that image file. For opening that image file, either you can use start process activity or you can use run command. So the run command is generated like this. For example, if you just specify Windows plus R, it actually gives the run window, and here you type that like the path of the id card, then click ok, then what you can see, the image file is open here. Okay, so for like opening that run command, you can use send hotkey activity at first. Send hotkey activity. Okay, it will actually helps in like opening that run command, run window command, opening run window. So now you want to like use shortcut here, since when you are pressing Windows button and R, you can see that this run window pop-up appears. So here you want to specify like this, Windows, and the key value should be what, R. Okay, so when you use this send hotkey activity by using these options, it will open this run window. So after opening the run window, what we have to do, that is, let's say just try to open it again. So after opening the run window, what we want to do, we want to type the file path here, like of that id card, then click on ok. So for that, use type into activity, type into activity. Okay, so you want to specify the type id card file for opening. So just indicate this on the screen. Now click on, let's say, empty field. Now here you want to specify the id card file path. Okay, so since we know that we have, like here, while downloading that id card, we have specified the id card file path. I think here we have specified that id card file path here. Okay, So again we have to type the same thing in this run type into section. So instead of typing that long code again, try to save this ID card file path in a variable. Okay, for that use, let's say I have to create another variable. That is, create another variable. The ID card file path. Okay, so its scope should be okay. So try to give an assign variable here so that you can avoid typing the same things here again and again. So ID card file path be equal to what? So just copy the same here, everything. Click OK. Then okay. So what you are doing? You are assigning the ID card folder path. Now just specify ID card file path. Okay. So that is why you can avoid like typing that long code again and again. So just specify here also ID card file path. Okay. So it is here we are actually specifying the like in the run command. Actually, you are specifying the complete file path where you want to open the image file. So after typing that complete file path, next is what you want to click on OK. So for that, use click option. Okay. So here we want to do what? Click OK. So just save this. Click OK. So here we are clicking OK. After typing the file path, we are clicking OK. So here, if you let's just avoid this case. Okay. So if you take the like already there is a file path being specified. So if you just click OK here, so what happens? You can see the image file is open. Already this is actually part of my previous automation work. Okay, that is why it is shown as a pop-up here. So you can see the image file is open when you click OK. So after like opening that image file, what we want to do, we want to extract this id number. That is the main motive in this sequence. Okay, so after opening this id number, like so after sorry for obtaining this id number, since it is an image file, you can use get OCR text activity. Okay, for that use get OCR text. Okay, so indicate this on the screen, which since try to extract this whole part itself. Okay, so here we are extracting the, you look here, we are extracting this whole details. Okay, but we only want this number only. So what we can do here? Okay, so for that before that you try to save the data, like the data that is stored extracted by this OCR should be stored in a string variable. For that you create a string called id number. Okay, so this is a string. So for that the name id number, so give it a name, get OCR, like get id number. If you just look at its selector, for example, if you just look at its selector, You can identify that this is specified only for James here. Just validate it, just open it again. Yeah. If you look here, it is only validated for James because specifically the name is provided as james.png. For example, if you just close this one, okay, and then open another ID card image, let's say, yeah, already this is a part of my work which actually I have done using normal sequence. During that time, during my automation at that time, actually I have downloaded that ID card. That is actually I am showing you here. Okay. So if I take another, let's say another ID card, let's say I take the ID card of Sharath Raju. If I open it, now what you can see, if you just go to selector, you can see the selector is not validating that image file. Why? The reason is that it is actually specific because the name is actually here already being specific here. So you can replace this name by a wildcard character so that it can become dynamic. So you can say now it is being validated even though the image is of Sharath Raju. So it is being validated. So it's now okay. So if you want to ensure that if it is like if it can work for every image file, you can just open different image file and check whether the selector is validating or not. Okay. So after that, click on OK. So here, like we are actually in this OCR text, what we are actually extracting this whole section actually we are extracting, but we know that we don't require this whole section, only this ID number is actually required. So for that what you can use is like you can actually split the data and only take the ID number from that. For that what you can use here is you can use a split string activity. I think it is activity is not available here, so you can download it from manage packages. Okay, so I think name of that workflow, workflow manager dot activity. Click on install. Okay. So here just search for split string activity. Yeah. The use of split string is actually I told you that we are extracting this whole ID number part. Only we require is ID number. For that we can use split string activity. For a split string you can use for split string ID number. For that you have to provide the input condition. For that we know that this get OCR text actually extract the whole section and then store it in the ID number variable. And we can provide this as an input to this get split string ID number. For that you just give ID number and just provide the result here. Like actually the result should be in array format. So specify the array name here like ID array, and it should be in the array of strings. Okay. So just specify the result here, ID array. Now specify separator. Separator means on what basis you are separating your like obtained text. Here we are separating based on this colon. So you can specify that colon here by in the double quotation mark specify colon here. So it will separate the data based on the colon. So for example, if this is a complete data, it will split into two data, ID number and this number. and that is what this split string activity do. So since you know that this id number, sorry, this id array is actually array of strings which actually store this component of the string which is splitted based on its separator. So here you know that our separator is this colon, so we are separating it into id number, this id number text version and this id number. So only what we want is this number only. So from this id array, how you can get that? For that, just use another assign activity. Sorry, uh, can just specify id number. Okay. For that, just use id number. Then process id number. Now, like actually we are storing these splitted strings in the array format, and the array, if you check, it consists of only two elements because only separator provides this colon only and only one separator is there. So it is split into two elements, one is this element and second is this element, and out of this only we want this element here, and it is in which, and since there are two elements, so this should be the zero, it should be at the index 0 position, and this should be at the first position. So for that, how to assign the id number is from the id array. So what is the position of this id number only? It is in which index? First index. So specify it as, let's say, id array 1. Okay. So we can see that we have obtained that id number from that id array. So after obtaining that id number, so after we know that this image file has no use, no, like after extracting the id number for this particular image file, this image file we can close it. For that, what we can use here is we can use close window activity. Close window activity. So you can specify name here for this close image file. So just specify which so specify the indicate the window on the screen. Okay. So now you can see that we have completed what our this sequence, extracting id number from id card. So what we have do here, first we have opened the run command using send hotkey activity. After opening the run command, we actually type the, like when you open this run command, you can see that you want to type the file name, or you want to type the file name. So type the file name and then click on ok. After clicking on ok, what happens, the image file like this will appear, and using get OCR text activity, we are extracting this whole section. Since only we need this number only, so for that we are using split string activity, and the result should be string array. To assign that id number from string array, we are using like it should be at what index? It should be at the first index of the id array. So if you check here, it should be at the first index of the id array, and it is assigned to the id number variable, and this id number is actually what we are actually typing here. Okay, for creating that QR code. I think you have understood this sequence well. Okay, so just close this. Also close this, then click on save. So after completing this extracting id number from this id card sequence, next sequence what we need to create is, using this id number we have extracted from this image file, we want to like generate the QR code. For that, what we want to do, we want to type the id number in this type field and then click on create QR code. So that is all what we want to do in the next sequence, that is create QR code. So for that, create a sequence folder, just name create QR code. Okay, so it will actually create the QR code. So for that, so uh, so you can see here, it will actually type the QR code here and then click on create QR code. But as you know that like when you so main aim here is to create the QR code in this sequence, but we know that the QR code is saved in which format. The QR code is actually saved in name underscore id format, and it should be saved in a specific folder. So for instance, for an example, I will show you based that is, this is my work, like this is another automation challenge that I have done in my previous video using like data table method in RE framework. There, after running the workflow, I have obtained a result like this. Like you can see that actually this QR code is the where I'm storing my QR code files. If you open that QR code folder, you can see there are different folders are there with having the name of that person. If you click on one, if each folder, you can see there's a QR code exists for that person in that file name of name underscore his ID in a folder having in the name his name itself. Okay, so in this way we want to create a like folder for storing the QR code of individual persons. Okay, so for this, what we want to do? So for that, we want to like create folder. For that, first we need to assign the folder path for creating the new folder. So for that, click on assign the so use click use assign folder path. So here we are assigning the folder path. For that, you create another variable that is folder path, and then it specifies uh, scope in string, sorry, process. And after that, you type here what type here folder path. Now provide the value or provide the folder path in this value section. So actually where we are storing our QR code or where we want to create the folder, actually we are for our purpose we are actually created two folders. One for storing that ID card, here we are storing that ID card, and here we are storing the QR code. Within this we are actually creating various subfolders by using this and for that we are assigning that folder path here. So for that, just copy this part and copy this section. Okay. So for that, use to know the like path of our workflow. That is, to know the path of the QR code underscore perform workflow. Use environment environment dot current directory. It actually gives the path of the QR code underscore perform. After that. Actually where we want to save our like where we want to create the folder inside this QR code folder itself, and what should be the name of that folder. The name of the folder should be the name of the person for which the QR code is created, and it can be retrieved from the transaction item by in transaction item dot specific content. The name is retrieved in what format you can see here. So sorry, so just uh, mm, so it takes some time. Just open it here, open this queue section, and if you take individual queue item, so the key name should be what to obtain the name is name, the key of key for obtaining that name. So for just type that here, because transaction item dot specific contains a dictionary, and here you want to specify the key. So the key here is actually name, and it is an object, so you want to convert to string, so you can use dot to string. Okay, so in this way we are able to create the what, the folder here. Okay, so it is actually saved in which folder path, the inside this QR code folder we are creating a new folder having the name as the name of the person for which the QR code is created. Okay, so this we have assigned this to the folder path variable. So next, to create a new folder, what we want to use, we can use an activity called create QR code, sorry, create folder, create folder activity. So now here you want to specify what, you want to specify the folder name. So you can, since we have specified that folder path for new folder in this folder path variable, so just specify the name here itself as folder path. Okay, so in this way we are able to create a new folder for storing the individual QR code. So after creating this new folder, okay, so this part is over. So after creating this new folder, so next part is what we want to do, like we want to type the ID number here and then click on create QR code and save that QR code in that particular folder. So for that you can use what, type into activity. So type into activity and specify that here, and click on empty field. Okay, so now indicate that screen on the screen here. So now here you want to type the ID number. So for that type into ID number. Here you want to type ID number. So for that just specify, I think if you check here the like if you go here, the ID number is stored in ID number variable, so you have to specify here as ID number variable because it actually contains that ID number. Okay, so we are typing the ID number here. So after typing the ID number, what we want to do, we want to, like after typing that ID number here, we want to click on create QR code. So just use click activity to click on create QR code option or button. Click on uh, create QR code. Click on, just specify it again. I think some error has updated. Click on create QR code. So for instance, I will show you what happens. Let's say you just type a simply a number 1001. When you click on create QR code, what happens? A save as dialog box will appear, and here it will ask to type the complete file name here and then ask to save that. Okay, so we want to specify the complete file path of that QR code along with the folder where we want to save that, and also the name of that QR code, and it should be saved in which format, in JPG file format, and the name of the QR code should be name underscore ID. Okay, so for that you can use type into activity again for typing that file path here. So just use type into activity, just specify like the complete path of that file here. So here you just press empty field. Okay, so actually where we are storing this QR code, because for storing individual QR code we have created a folder. Inside this folder we are actually storing that QR code. So for that like up to this folder section, or actually this folder path actually stores this file path or the folder path, the path of the folder, new folder which is being created. So we can store this QR code in this folder itself. So now we can specify that folder path here, sorry, the file path here where we want to store our QR code file. For that, folder path plus. Why we are specifying folder path? Because this is the folder in which we want to save our QR code file. Bar plus. Now we want to provide the name of our QR code. What should be the name format of our QR code? I already have specified the name format of our QR code. It should be name underscore ID as shown here. So you want to specify like this in transaction item dot specific content name uh, plus transaction item dot specific content name plus it actually output the name. So if we just check here, yeah, name. Now you want the ID. How you can get the ID? You can use the same because the key name actually is ID here. So using the transaction item you can get like this in transaction item dot specific content ID. It actually output the value of ID dot to string plus it should be saved in what format? It should be saved in PNG format. So specify that also here. Sorry, it should be saved in JPJ format. Okay, specify that here also. Okay, and click on save. Okay, so just specify type into file path. Okay, I think there's some error actually had obtained. Let me check that. 1 minute. Plus plus. I think there's an error. Oh, actually, I didn't specify here dot to string. Yeah, now it's okay. Click on here. Uh, Let me check. I think my downloading ID card, I didn't specify that format in which I need to save that. So let me check that. ID card file path. Mm, yeah, just me see that. Okay, it's correct. Hmm. So here we are specifying the file path along like where we want to save that QR code along with the QR code name in which format in .jpj format. Okay, so it's okay now. So after like specifying that file path, for example, if I show you here, you just specify the file path. For instance, I'm just saving it in the desktop for showing you what happens. So let's say I give a name 12. Then like after specifying the file path what you want to give or what you want to do, you want to click on save button for saving that image or QR code. For that use click activity, click activity. So you can use click save. Okay, so indicate on the screen, just I think indicate it once again. Okay. So after typing that file path we are actually clicking on save button. So if you click on save button, what happens? Now you can see that a pop-up is displayed saying that QR code generation is completed. Now what you have to do, you want to click on OK. So for that again use another click activity to click OK. Suppose that indicate on the screen and click on OK. Okay. So after clicking on OK, you can see that the process section is completed. That is processing like QR code for one transaction item is completed. And this is actually the main aim of our automation flow. That is to create QR code for that for the visitor whose action is to create QR code. Okay, so this is actually our main aim for creating that automation workflow, and that we had completed here. Okay, so if I by this we are actually completing our process workflow. So let's check whether everything is correct or not. So I just summarize what we have done here. So at first, actually for this we have created three sequence. First is to download the ID card from this website. Okay, to download ID card from this website, we actually search by using name space ID, and if this download button is found for that particular search, you click on download option. Uh, you click on download option and then save the data in that ID folder provided in the workflow. You can check here. Actually, your ID card is being stored in this ID folder. Okay, if this data or while searching, if you don't found this download option, then what you want to do, you can throw a business rule exception, and thus you can go to next transaction. Okay, so that is what we have done in this first sequence, that is downloading ID card from the website. So in the next sequence, that is extracting ID number from the ID card, what you have to do, first you use send hotkey activity to open the run window. That is you use hotkey activity to open this run window, and then type the complete file path of that ID card file. And please remember, the ID card should be saved in PNG file format. And after typing the complete file path for the ID card image file, then click on OK. When you click on OK, an image file will appear like this, and from this, using get OCR text activity, you want to extract this whole section. And our main agenda is we want to require only this ID number. For that, what we have used a split string activity which only extract that ID number. Okay, and then store it in the ID number variable. After that, what we have done, we have closed that image file which I have used again, and this is what we have done in the second sequence. After this, we went to create QR code. For creating the QR code means this QR code is actually saved in a specific folder whose name is the name of the person for which we are creating the QR code. So that we have created a folder for this. After creating the folder, we have typed the ID number into this QR code application, and then we have clicked on create QR code. When we click on create QR code, a save as dialog box will appear, where we want to type that file name and then click on save. After that, after clicking on save, then a pop-up window will display, which will where we want to click OK, and this process of QR code generation is completed. Okay, so I hope you have understood this section very well. So I think just let me check whether the type into activity you have clicked empty field for all cases. Okay, yes. Click on save. Okay, You have typed the ID number, the type into activity, everything is now correct. So now use the activity code. So everything is correct. So we have completed our process section or process workflow successfully. So after completing the process workflow, next part is end process. That is like we have first started with the initialization state where we initialize application, then get transaction data where we retrieve the transaction item, then went to process transaction where each transaction item is processed, and then QR code is generated. After all this process, we want to end the process. So in the end process, we want to actually close all application. Okay. So here we are actually closing all the applications that we have opened in the initialization state. For that here actually we are opening a browser and opening the application. So for that you have to use close all application, close application process. We can give a name, let's say close QR code application. So just specify the QR code application here. So by using this activity we are closing the QR code, and now we can use to close our browser, that is close our website, this website. For that what we are using here is we are using attach browser activity, that is let's say attach Chrome browser, attach Chrome browser activity, and indicate uh, indicate the window, the screen. After that use close tab to close that particular tab, close tab option. So after this we have completed this close all application state. In close all application state we have closed that QR code application, and also we have closed that Chrome browser also. So after this section, next is we want to kill our process. So killing the process, we can specify the kill the process which has to be killed in this kill process activity. So for that what you can use is activity, you just go there and use kill process. Okay, so using this advantage, you know what is the use of kill process activity. This kill process activity closes all the application like before the automation work starts in a RE framework. Also helps to forcefully close an application if in the case of a system exception. Okay, so in our case we want to like close two processes. One is actually we are working with our website, we want to close this website. So we want to kill this website process. Also we want to kill this QR code application too. So for killing the website, or we can use kill process Chrome. The process name is actually Chrome. So type the process name here, that is Chrome. Okay. So next process we want to kill here is what? The QR code application. So just specify kill process QR code app. So for that just specify the process name. So if you go here, just check the property section and specify the process name. Okay, so this is the process name, QR code encoder. So here since we are using two process, we are actually killing, that is first we are killing the process Chrome, next we are killing the QR code application. Okay, so after that click on save, go back. Okay, so by this actually we had completed all the parts or all the sections in this QR code performer. Okay, so just we can summarize what we have done actually here. Okay, so let's start with the initialization state. So what we have done in initialization state, we have actually opened all the applications, website, etc. that is required for our automation. So in our case, we have opened this identity management website and also the QR code application. Check the browser type is Chrome. Yes. Okay. So that is what we have done in this open website case. In the open QR code application, what we have done, we have opened the QR code application here. So that is what we have done here. Okay. And so after this, initializing the application, what we have done, we have actually move on to get transaction data state. So in get transaction data state, we are actually assigning each transaction item. Actually here I can see that, like, here we are using a performer workflow, and the transaction item is a queue item, means it is actually extracting the data from the queue. For taking the data from the queue, we are using get transaction item activity, and defaultly in RE framework all this is being set, since defaultly the transaction item is queue item in RE framework. So also queue name also has been specified here defaultly. So there is no change we had to be made in this section. So next is process section. So in process section, what we have done, in process section actually we are actually processing our transaction item, means processing our transaction item to produce the QR code. For that, first we search the, like, uh, we search in the search panel of this website, we search for with name and ID, and then click on download option if this download option appears. Then after clicking on download option, we want to specify the path where we want to store the ID card. Okay, and then click on save, and this is being done in this first sequence. And in case if this download button doesn't appear, we can throw a business exception case. And actually in my previous work, like this, in my previous tutorial, it is tutorial 4.0, I have explained a separate case what happens when there is a business exception also. So you can watch that what happens in case when a business exception appear in this case. So after downloading the ID card, next step is we want to extract that ID number from that ID card. For that, we are using run command or run window to open that ID card. After that, you are typing that file path here and then clicking on OK. When you click on OK, what happens? Your image file will appear, and using get OCR text activity, we are extracting this whole part. But we know that since we require only this part, we are using the split string activity there, and using that you are assigning that ID number, and after assigning that ID number we are closing that image file. So this is what we have done in this sequence. After doing this sequence, we have went to create QR code sequence. In create QR code sequence, we have assigned a folder path. Like we know that the QR code is stored in each folder, specific folder having the name equal to the person for which the QR code is created. And so that we are assigned the complete folder path, and complete folder path, and then we are using create folder activity to create the folder for each QR code item to store. Then like here we are typing that ID number, and after typing that ID number we are clicking on create QR code. And when you click on create QR code, what happens, a dialog box will appear where you will type the file path and click on save. After clicking on save, another pop-up will appear saying that your QR code generation is completed. Then you can click OK. So this is actually what we have done in this create QR code section. Okay, so just close this. After this process section, what we have done, we have used close all. We have went to close all application to close all the application that we have opened during initialization state. So that we have done here. After that, what we have done, we have used kill process activity to kill the processes. Here we have killed two processes. One is Chrome and second is the QR code app that we have done. So this is all that we have done in the QR code perform. Before running the workflow, try to close all the applications. close that. And check whether you have whether the connection with the like orchestrator is okay. Just go to orchestrator settings. Yeah, it is being connected, so close it. Let's run the workflow. So it's, I think, checking validation errors. Now I think, yeah, it's running. So actually it will take the data, each transaction item from the queues, then like it will search for the data, then it will download the ID card. You can see here it is downloading the ID card after searching by using name and ID. Now after downloading the ID card, here it is actually opening the ID card image file by using run command. After that it is retrieving that ID number, and in the QR code application, now you can see that it will retrieve the ID number. Now it will type it in the QR code application, then it will create the QR code. Okay, so after creating QR code, it will save it in a destination with have by using that file name format as name underscore ID in that specific folder. Okay, so it will repeat for all of the data too, you can see here. So same thing is now being repeated. And please remember, the ID card is being saved in which file format? PNG file format. Okay, okay, same thing is being repeated everywhere. Okay, I think working fine. I think it's working fine actually. So while this automation was starting, actually it is opening that both QR code application and that Chrome also, and the website also. Then after that only it is actually taking the data from the queue item, searching for the data, downloading the ID card and so on. Okay, so please remember that too. So around 10 data has to be processed, I think so. So we have completed our workflow successfully. So if you look here, you can see that all our transaction has been set to be successful. 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10 data actually has to be found to be run successfully. So if you can just go to Orchestrator and see the status of our queue item. So just go to Chrome and go to platform.uipath.com. Okay, so you can see, okay, now just go to queue, and you can now see here that if you just go to view transaction, you can see that all our transaction has to be found to be successfully done. First transaction, second, all the transaction has to be done very successfully. Okay, because earlier when the before the queue items were being processed, we have seen that status was new because it was going to be processed. But after processing, you can see that all the transaction has to be done successfully. That is why the status has been changed to successful. And if you go to the like folder, you can see that all the id cards also has been downloaded here. You can see all the 10 id cards has been downloaded here, and along with the id card, for each id number the qr code is generated and it is stored in this qr code folder that you can see here. Okay, so you can see if you look here, you can see the qr code is stored like in the file format of jpg file format, and with the file name as name underscore id, and it is stored in a specific folder. Okay, each qr code is stored in a specific folder whose folder's name is actually the name of the person for which the qr code is generated. So from this, what we can say that we have run our perform workflow also successfully using queues. Okay, so if you so we have completed our tutorial on visitor ID card QR creation process using queues, and here we have done two workflows. One is to transfer the data from the Excel file to the queue, and next workflow is performer, from which the queue items or the items from the queue are processed to generate the QR code. Okay, so that is what we have done in the performer section. So I hope you have understood this tutorial well, and if you have any doubts on this tutorial, you can just comment in the comment box. I can reach out to that. And if you like this video, please subscribe for more updates. Thank you.